Hi, I'm Linda Mal, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Nasher Sculpture Center, and our interviewer, Kay Yoland, speaks with Mai-Thu Perret about her exhibition, Sightings, Mai-Thu Perret. Now for Art This Week.
Thank you so much, Mai-Thu, for coming here today to talk with us. We're standing in your show, in your installation. I thought if you could start off by telling us what visitors can expect, what you're showing as a part of your work here for the Nasher.
So it's basically a show of mostly sculpture, centering around a group of new figures that I made specifically for the exhibition here in Dallas. And there's also a very large painting that's made on a carpet. Call them carpet paintings.
Here behind us,
yeah.
Is this the first time you've created large-scale paintings like this, or this is often in your installation
Well,
work?
this size, this is the second one I've made this big, but I've made quite a few of them in, like 2.40 meters high, so slightly smaller than this, a bit, 2/3 of this size.
And visitors will see the mannequins that you have around the room, working with different mediums. You have perhaps paper mache, silicone, ceramic.
Mm-hmm.
Are those mediums that you work with a lot, and is there a reason why you choose to alternate the bodies in these different materials?
Yes, it's kind of a mashup of all the different sort of sculpture, figurative sculpture materials I've used in the past. And I was especially interested in trying to bring it all together for this exhibition. My first mannequin pieces were made out of paper mache, incorporating neon lights, which I decided, which I didn't want to redo exactly the same thing. And I was interested in trying to sort of bring this earlier mode of making figures, very low-tech, very simple, homemade way of making mannequins, together with elements that I've used in more recent works that are maybe a little bit more either technically complex or just produced in a way, like the silicone elements, for example, which I've started using for performances, and then they made their way into the sculptures. So it's a collage. Pretty much the idea was this collage.
I also see maybe an analogy or a metaphor with guerrilla making and guerrilla groups, and there's, as we'll start to discuss, this idea of the commune that you've set up, and perhaps some of the works, as you said, are kind of more lo-fi to make, lower budget, definitely. And then others are more complex and technologically harder to put together.
Yeah.
So maybe we can move on to my second question, which would be about your fictitious feminist art commune, which you've been creating over the last 16 years or so.
Yeah.
I have maybe 3 different questions about that you can probably answer together. Firstly, the inspiration for this group, how it's involved, and I guess its key objectives for you in your project and in your kind of mission.
When I started making work, I was struggling with contingency and whim, and I thought I was looking for something that would get me out of this problem of why blue rather than red, or why pretty rather than ugly. And I found it all arbitrary and random. I was very influenced and interested in conceptual art at the time, and especially fascinated with Sol LeWitt's idea that the idea is the machine that makes the art. And I was trying to find something that would work like this, but in a more open and maybe complex way, I guess, or narrative way.
But ground the work.
But ground the work in something, and also make the work escape me, in the sense that if I had a sort of all-governing principle, then the work would be ran by the principle, not by my personal taste. And I guess the fact that I studied literature probably has a lot to do with this. These ways of working or thinking were very present for me. So this is really how it started with the commune. As for the influences, apart from things like LeWitt and things like that, there's a lot of literary things that I was influenced by. Things from like this American writer called Charlotte Gilmer Perkins, who wrote a fantastically weird science fiction novel at the turn of the 20th century called Herland, where a bunch of American kind of male explorers stumble upon a country that is peopled entirely with women, and that is somehow like running very smoothly and has no wars and so on, and so they become kind of assimilated into this land. So things like this, I guess.
Maybe we can move on to a discussion of
this,
how you've constructed the work. So we have the painting behind us, we have certain ceramic objects around the space that are, resemble eyes. We have these silicone or transparent guns that are in quite neon bright, almost candy colours that, you know, to children are very kind of alluring. Can you talk about those components and how you develop in your studio those combinations that create the work?
So, I mean, the show very much started with the figures and this inspiration. I mean, it was a sort of a kind of love moment, you know, just so you read about people in the newspaper and you fall in love with them type of thing. You know, you become fascinated and you want to know who they are, and you admire them because, frankly, you know, the women in the state of Rojava and in Syria, these are, you know, I mean, these are quite people who are living through really horrific things and very courageous, and of course we live, you know, I live a fairly comfortable bourgeois Western, you know, early 21st century life, and so I had this sort of admiration, and I guess and maybe specifically, I think when I made work, I was especially disgusted by, you know, it's kind of a very gut reaction to just finding the politics of the world at a given moment a bit sort of too much and depressing.
For example, ISIS and the threat for the women, perhaps.
For example, ISIS, or for example, you know, bombs placed in you know, kind of Cambodian cafes and sort of mixed to working class neighborhoods in Paris. I mean, it's a bit like if you bombs blowing up in Williamsburg or something, you know, this sort of stuff. It's not very, very nice. I mean, we don't live a very pacified historical moment. You know, just witnessed the presidential campaign. If you're just turning on the television, it's like a horror story all the time. And so I think this work, in a way, was quite linked to just my relation, you know, my just gut kind of discomfort, I guess. But then I just sort of went about. It's like there's an inspiration or an impetus or a drive to make an artwork, and then and then suddenly you get into like the problem solving of what it is that you want to make, right? And from the very beginning, I thought, okay, these things have to be compounds, and they have to be kind of mashups and collages. Maybe I was also thinking a lot of a kind of almost like Dadaistic aesthetic, where some kind of uncertainty about the outside world is kind of mirrored in a kind of discontinuity of form. I mean, it's very simple, kind of formalistic way to look at things, but. And then, so I sort of took apart, in a way, the photographs of these women, or these videos of these women in Rojava, and tried to think of how I could inspire myself from them to make these sculptures. And so, yeah, the guns, it felt to me that the guns were one of the major, I mean, you see them all the times. I try not to watch too many ISIS videos because it's...
I can't actually watch them.
But the problem with them is that you think that you're watching something that is pretty okay to watch, and then suddenly it's really gory, and it's very depressing, and it's some kind of like horror porn that I think is, you know...
Well, as you mentioned before, we live in a new... this is a kind of new chapter in civilization, this idea that we can go on the internet and see these things that were once only brought to us by a few journalists with rolls of film photographing the news. Suddenly we can watch executions.
Yeah, and suddenly we can watch art-directed executions that are shot with, you know, Canon 5Ds.
Right, and beautifully edited, and the credits go down.
Yeah, I mean, that's you know, there's a whole kind of system of representation around this aesthetic around this. Well, because these are recruiting materials as well, so yeah, that's why they make them this way, I guess. But anyways, so I noticed that the gun. I mean, and to be fair, the Syrian, the Rojava, the Free State of Rojava, a lot of the videos that they put out have the exact same purpose. Only they're just much more. There's propaganda that's for the side that you like, and there's propaganda that's for the side that freaks you out. And I find the Kurdish propaganda more palatable than the ISIS propaganda. So these guns were like a major thing, and I don't know. I just thought they're such a fetish as well, and so making them into these kind of regressive, candy-like things felt quite. It was quite an immediate thing.
Well, also showing it in the United States. I mean, it's one thing to show it in Europe, but in the United States, where guns are illegal, and there's this constant
Yeah.
debate about whether they
Yeah,
should be
sure.
banned, and these mass killings. It also resonates on that level, that
Yeah,
children
sure.
are playing with their parents' guns and killing each other
Yeah.
by mistake. So as you said before, you can come into this installation and read it many different ways.
Yeah, it was a conversation I had with many of my friends in Europe. They kept saying, "Oh, but you're making this work for Texas," and I was like, "Yes, I know." And they were like, "How don't you think people are going to read this with a whole different lens?" And I was, yeah, maybe, but that's also fairly, I think, interesting. That's one of the things that's interesting about exhibiting, how do you say, internationally, is that if you show this in China, people will have a complete, there's a whole lot of associations that people will probably project onto this that are different. So yeah, this material, it was definite kind of choice. I didn't want to use real weapons, for example. I just felt somehow, there's a lot of decisions in terms of like what is real and what is fake, what is copied and what is, like for example, the shoes are bronze.
Okay, and then ceramic and bronze.
Yeah, the ceramic pieces were kind of also kind of produced separately in a way and then dressed the same way, but they are kind of almost like autonomous. In terms of fabrication, there was kind of a slightly separate process than the rest of the works, but all of the other works, they wear the same shoes and they're hyper real. I think most people don't notice that they're looking at bronze when they see them, which.
But I'm interested in that possible double meaning then, that they're real, but then they're also this really heavy material potentially, and they also maybe mirror a monument to a figure, whether it's a Russian monument or a fallen soldier, or.
Well, I thought it was important to have materials that were kind of traditional sculpture materials, and to sort of mix them in a rather desacralizing way, in an particular way. I don't know what really the effect is, but with materials that are much more mundane or much more easy, like the paper mache, for example, or much more, let's say, it's not really that making the paper mache figures is easy, it's more that it's
more democratic.
Domestic, economically democratic, and it's linked to something in childhood as well, that, these are things that you learn how to do in school when you're little, and I like that it runs really, that there's the range of production, means of production that are from extremely sophisticated and expensive, like the bronze and the paper mache. So then it became this collage, and I was trying to have a variety of the different media, and to have a kind of gradation from the most real, like this figure, which is entirely, has everything that's visible of her is silicone and hyper realistic, to this figure, which is entirely paper mache, to the figure over there that is a compound because it is made out of wicker, but then is wearing a silicone mask. So in a way, that's a real chimera. Yeah, I think it was, and it goes back to, I guess, a lot of other things I've done recently with female bodies, especially in performance, where the body is really treated like a set of parts.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned performances, because that would be my next question. You're going to do 2 performances here at the Nasher, and one of them is a premiere. Can you tell us, before we maybe go into the reason for using performance and why that's interesting, what will visitors see, and what are these 2 performances?
So the existing performance is a piece called Figures that I created a couple years ago for a performance biennial in Geneva, and it's a very frontal, short piece, so it's quite theatrical, and it will be here in the amphitheater and hopefully outdoors. Hopefully we can be outside when we're doing it, because the architecture is ideally suited for it. It's the setup is it evolved from a kind of concern about voice and ventriloquism, and about how a body is animated. Even if the body is a sculpture or an animate object, what makes the object look like it's alive, I guess. It was designed following or kind of imitating the principles of a Japanese puppetry form called bunraku, where I don't know if you've ever seen these. It's giant people. There's manipulators who are on stage, and they move on a stage set that looks quite similar to like traditional Japanese theater. They move these giant life-size, almost often life-size puppets, and you have more than one person manipulating each puppet, and the manipulators, I mean, contrary to the Western puppetry styles where it's the person who is moving the puppet is always hidden, the manipulator is on stage with the puppets. So you have this sort of very strange double dance where the body, it's not an illusionistic thing like in traditional Western puppetry where they try to make you believe the illusion. It's a very fascinating thing where the illusion is flat in front of you and you kind of move in and out of believing the illusion, of being with it. And it opens a fantastic set of questions about theatre and voice and so on.
Kind of Brechtian.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything.
Exactly.
You're not so much the passive viewer anymore. You're actively involved in questioning this dynamic.
Questioning the dynamic and viewing yourself, making the construction. So there is exactly this active relation, I guess, to it. And the piece is set to music, and there is a singer who acts and functions as the voice. So there is a dancer who functions, I guess, who animates a puppet. And then there is a singer who is the voice, and the voice of the puppet to an extent. And I was really in this is really the mechanism that sort of generated writing about, making this piece. And the narrative arc or whatever of the piece is this puppet going through many different incarnations. So it's a figure or a body that is many different people, that becomes many different people through time, throughout the performance. And this is achieved through a series of masks, silicone faces like these that are taken off, put on the puppet and taken on and off. And
your other performance that you'll be premiering here. Can you tell us a little bit about
so
that?
That's, it's all very much in progress, but it's kind of a pendant or a double to the other performance. So we're working with the same crew, so the same musician, dancer, singer, and myself, and we're going to spread out the performance throughout the grounds and the building of the Nasher. So the idea is to work on a kind of procession-like performance, working with local people. So it'll be much more about a group and a collective, and bigger number of bodies moving around, and about sound. Also, we're collaborating with the symphony, the Dallas Symphony for the sound part as well. So we'll have help from them.
So thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing your performances.
We want to thank Mai-Thu for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to NasherSculptureCenter.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your poem.